Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Idle Park Talk Show. While the Islamic Republic of Iran was conducting the funeral of its supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the United States Navy was, according to Iranian accounts, attempting to take advantage of this solemn occasion to escort commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. To understand why this matters, we first need to understand how navigation through the Strait of Hormuz has changed since the outbreak of the US-Iran war. Because of the recent geopolitical conflict, navigation through the Strait of Hormuz is now, according to Iranian authorities, effectively divided into two separate corridors. The northern route, or what many now refer to as the Iranian corridor, passes through Iranian northern territorial waters near Larak Island. Under the post-conflict arrangement claimed by Iran, Tehran asserts authority over this corridor and requires vessels to obtain authorization or, in some cases, pay navigation fees to transit through the strait. The southern route, or the Omani corridor, follows Oman's coastline along the southern section of the strait. Oman continues to maintain the traditional principle of unrestricted navigation through this route. I should remind you that before the US-Iran conflict, there was no distinction between an Iranian corridor and an Omani corridor. Commercial shipping followed the internationally recognized traffic separation scheme, consisting of one inbound lane and one outbound lane. When the United States and Israel intensified their military campaign against Iran in February, Iran responded by imposing what it described as a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. From that point on, Iran began regulating and controlling vessel movements through this strategic waterway. Since then, Iran has exercised significant control over navigation through the strait and at various points has reportedly imposed navigation fees or transit charges. In my opinion, the provisions contained within the Memorandum of Understanding effectively legitimizes Iran's continuous management and control of the Strait of Hormuz. As I have said many times before, the United States was never comfortable with what I consider to have been Iran's strategic defeat in the Strait of Hormuz. I have consistently argued that allowing Iran to regulate navigation through one of the world's most important maritime choke points represented a significant geopolitical victory for Iran and at the same time reflected a decline in America's influence throughout the Gulf region. Although Washington signed the Memorandum of Understanding with Iran, it has continuously tried to challenge Iran's authority of the strait and re-establish its own influence over navigation through the strait. Do you remember what I called the American blockade of the Iranian blockade? The so-called Operation Project Freedom lasted less than 48 hours before the Trump administration quietly abandoned it. The U.S. Central Command has also attempted to navigate the straits using Americans' naval vessels. Those attempts were met with what the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps described as swift and decisive responses. More recently, the United States and several of its allies have attempted to escort commercial ships and oil tankers through the southern Omani corridor. That approach, however, appears to be unacceptable to Iran. From Tehran's perspective, and this is my interpretation, Iran does not recognize the strait as two separate waterways. Rather, it considers the entire Strait of Hormuz to fall under its effective control. Consequently, any attempt by the United States to escort commercial vessels through the southern corridor without Iranian authorization is viewed as a direct challenge to that authority. Over the past several weeks, the United States and some of its allies have provided naval escort for commercial shipping using the southern route. Iran has responded by targeting vessels that, according to the IRGC, were navigating through routes that had not been approved. This, in my opinion, explains why on Monday and Tuesday of last week, Iran struck 3 commercial vessels: a Qatari liquefied natural gas tanker, a Saudi-flagged crude oil tanker, and a Liberian-flagged crude oil tanker. Those attacks infuriated the United States and prompted a fresh wave of military strikes by US Central Command. At the time these incidents unfolded, President Donald Trump was attending a NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey, where he announced that the ceasefire with Iran had effectively come to an end. He made those remarks following the latest round of tit-for-tat military exchanges between Washington and Tehran. Trump later reinforced what he described as the collapse of the Memorandum of Understanding by announcing the resumption of US naval blockade through a post on Truth Social. Even before President Trump officially declared the ceasefire over, the US Treasury Secretary had already withdrawn permits allowing Iran to export its oil internationally. That decision immediately restricted Iranian oil and petrochemical export, and guess what happened next? Exactly what anyone could have predicted. Oil prices immediately began to rise. During the ceasefire period, Iran reportedly sold at least 50 million barrels of crude oil, most of it to China and other Asian markets. Some analysts have argued that many of the tankers that transited the strait during this period were Iranian vessels carrying significant volumes of oil, generating billions of dollars in revenue for Iran. Beyond oil sales, regional financial developments also strengthened Iran's economy. One could certainly argue that Iran emerged as the biggest beneficiary to both the ceasefire and the Memorandum of Understanding. Personally, I have always believed that the ceasefire was destined to fail. From the very beginning, the Memorandum of Understanding appeared ambiguous, incomplete, and intentionally vague. It is difficult to understand why any sovereign state would regard such a document as the foundation for a lasting peace agreement, unless, of course, neither side genuinely intended to reach a permanent peace. Perhaps both governments simply wanted time to regroup, rebuild, and prepare for the next phase of the conflict. To me, the Memorandum of Understanding looked less like a peace agreement and more like a temporary pause, where each side waited for the other to violate the terms first. It created a situation in which the United States could pressure Iran into actions that Washington could later characterize as a violation of the provisions that were never fully defined in the first place. Just look at Article 4 and 5 of the memorandum. Both sides continues to interpret those provisions completely differently. That, in my opinion, is precisely why this agreement was never going to last. I have continued to insist that the road to any lasting peace between the United States and Iran begins and ends with the Strait of Hormuz. In my opinion, the February 2026 war fundamentally changed the geopolitical importance of this waterway. Iran's seizure and continued control of the strait have transformed what many once considered just another maritime passage into arguably the most strategically important shipping route in the world. The events of the past few months have demonstrated not only to Iran, but also to the United States that whoever controls the Strait of Hormuz controls one of the world's most critical maritime arteries and by extension influences a significant portion of global economy. Iran has demonstrated that controlling the strait is not only a military advantage, but also an economic opportunity. The power that controls this waterway has the ability to regulate maritime traffic, provide security and administration, and potentially collect navigation fees from vessels wishing to transit through it. The economic potentials are enormous, and perhaps that is precisely why on Monday, July 13, President Donald Trump posted on Truth Social and later stated during a Fox News interview that the United States will become the guardian of the Hormuz Strait. He argued that as a matter of fairness, the United States should receive compensation equal to 20% of the value of all commercial cargo moving through the strait to offset the enormous cost of protecting this vital shipping corridor. President Trump added that the United States had protected the Strait of Hormuz for more than 50 years and has never been paid for doing so. That announcement immediately sent shock waves throughout the maritime industry. Legal experts questioned whether such a proposal could ever be implemented under the international maritime law, while global energy markets reacted with another rise in oil prices. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, quickly mocked the proposal on social media. He argued that while those providing safe passage deserve compensation, 20% is of course too much. Iran will be fair, he wrote. However, less than 24 hours later, President Trump dramatically changed course. On Tuesday morning, he announced through social media that, following what he described as highly productive conversations with Middle Eastern leaders, he was abandoning the proposed 20% reimbursement fee altogether. But that was not the end of the story. Instead of collecting tolls directly from cargo ships, President Trump announced that the United States would instead pursue massive trade and investment commitment from Gulf states to the American economy. According to the president, this arrangement was very satisfactory and represented a far better alternative than attempting to monetize one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. To me, the hypocrisy is impossible to ignore. When Iran first introduced navigation fee for ships using the strait, the Trump administration strongly condemned the move. Washington argued that the strait was an international waterway and not the sovereign property of Iran. The United States insisted that Iran had no legal rights to charge tolls or profits from international navigation. Now, however, after recognizing the enormous economic potential associated with controlling this strategic waterway, the United States appears prepared to pursue financial benefits of its own, even though America has no geographical connection to the Strait of Hormuz. If Washington cannot collect tolls directly, it appears prepared to obtain financial compensation indirectly by encouraging, or some might argue, pressuring its regional allies to invest heavily in the United States. Those allies are the 6 Gulf Cooperation Council members: Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. These are the same countries that host American military bases and military assets. These are also the same countries that were not consulted before the war with Iran, but have nevertheless borne many of the consequences of that conflict. Over the past several days, Iranian retaliations have increasingly shifted towards American military facilities located within these Gulf states. According to reports, Iranian drone strikes targeted US military installations in Kuwait, striking fuel storage facilities, commercial communication infrastructures, an ammunition depot, a watchtower, and a Patriot air defense battery. Breaking months of relative neutrality, Iran also launched missiles towards Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the forward headquarters of US Central Command and one of America's most important military installations in the Middle East. Iran also carried out what has been described as its third missile strike against the Prince Hassan Air Base in Jordan, targeting American logistics and an air defense infrastructure. Think about what these countries are being asked to sacrifice. They have placed their national security, their territorial integrity, and the safety of their own citizens at considerable risk in support of the United States. Yet, according to President Trump's proposal, they would now also be expected to make major financial commitment to Washington in exchange for continued American protection. When it comes to America's Gulf allies, the American First policy appears to be very alive. The message seems to be this: we will confront Iran. Iran will retaliate against your territory. Your economies will suffer. Your people will live under the constant threat of missile and drone attacks. The reason I focus so much on the Gulf state is simple. Most of their oil, natural gas, and other exports pass through the Strait of Hormuz. That means they stand to bear the greatest economic burden if navigation through the strait becomes increasingly militarized or commercialized. It is also important to remember that despite all the rhetoric coming from Washington, the United States does not currently exercise direct control over the Strait of Hormuz. However, it is my firm belief that securing control of the strait has now become Washington's primary strategic objective. What we are witnessing today is, in my opinion, the beginning of the battle for control of the Strait of Hormuz. This is where the real war begins, and this is where ultimately the war will be decided. Because I continue to believe that whoever controls the Strait of Hormuz will control not only one of the world's most important shipping lanes, but also a powerful lever over the global economy itself. This is why the strait matters. This is why both sides continue to fight for it. And that is why I believe the future of this conflict will ultimately be decided there. Thank you for listening. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments below.